Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Stefan. I'm part of the leadership team here at Dwell Church of the Peninsula. We are a 2-year and some change church plant that is an experiment. We want to be a church that is Jesus-centered, research-based, trauma-informed, diverse, affirming, and inclusive, and we're finding out together what that looks and feels like. But we have discerned our way into feeling like we're on a quest to build a church where anyone can take a step closer to Jesus. So wherever you're coming from, whatever you're up to today, I hope even just briefly this afternoon you feel invited to take a step closer to Jesus. One of the things we say at Dwell Church is you belong because your story matters. Whatever is going on in your life, wherever you've come from, wherever you're going, or maybe like me, you think you're going, maybe you're not. We want to know that story, so we'd love to connect with you and see how we could serve you or connect you to this broader community, or at the very least, hear your story and say thank you for weaving your story into ours one time, if only one time. If you do want to connect with Dwell Church, get on our email list. You can tap the phone thingy. We don't know what to call that, but we're working on it. We've got a whole team of very smart people coming up with just the right word. Couple other things going on. We are deep into a process of hiring a next-gen director. So hopefully over the next month, we'll be having some of those candidates visiting and meeting the kids and leading the program. And so I want to humbly ask you to be really cool when they're here and not weird so that they like us and want to come work here, move from very far away, and join our little community. That's really exciting stuff. And we're able to do that because you all discern together to raise enough money to support that full-time role and invest in the ministry to our little beloved kiddos that we love so much that we have way too many of. So, gosh, this is everything at Dwell is a group project, but hiring this person is a group project. Thank you for being a part of it. Lastly, happy Pride Month to all of you. Yes, it was great. 8 days ago, we were part of the Pride Day at the San Mateo County Fair, which was lovely and loud, and I got just the right amount of sunburn. And then yesterday, we were at the Pride Fest in Central Park, which was also delightful and loud and wonderful. And Otzi was there all day at both of those events, so give it up for them for holding down the tent or the fort. And it was delightful. All right, what else do we got here? Okay, we've been in this series called Taste and See, and as Lisa said, we're exploring a theology of the human body. And as is the case with most of our series at Dwell, this came out of what we call community discernment. Every 6 months, we sit together in tables during this service, and each table has a group project. Everything here is a group project. And the group project is for that table, each table in the room, 8 or 10 of them, to say, if our table had 4 weeks of Dwell Church, this is the topic or the question we would want addressed. And maybe even this is how we would do it. And so one of the things that our staff recognized in like the whole list of all the good ideas here is that we're wrestling through how do we think about, in a spiritual or theological way, our own bodies? How do we experience our own bodies? And part of the background there is that we have inherited a set of philosophies that divorces us from our bodies. In fact, even the practice of mindfulness where you connect with your body is called mindfulness. It's in your brain still. So even our tools to connect with our body are still deeply, profoundly cerebral. And part of what we are wrestling through is the content of Scripture that invites us into a much more embodied spiritual practice. So each week, we're focusing as kind of a baby step into how do we connect with our bodies, a theological reflection on each of the 5 senses. So last week, we were smelling some jasmine, and it was delightful. It smelled great in here. Not that it doesn't normally smell good in here, but it smelled especially good there. All right, so here's where we're starting. Here's where I think that this leads theologically for us, and then maybe even spiritually for us, that you were gifted your body by God. He gave you your particular body as a gift. Now, sometimes growing up, you feel like a sense of dissatisfaction or discomfort, or it's a long journey to feel comfortable in your body. Everybody has experienced that. But what we see in Scripture is if we hang in there with the embodied nature of the gospel, that Jesus came in a human body, a very particular one with particular features and ethnicities and national stories. If we hang in there, if we sit with that concept, where we arrive is that your story and your body and your particularities were gifted to you specifically by God himself. Your body was designed by God to, in a one-of-one sort of way, in a deeply unique way, contain and carry the presence of Jesus into the world. Your body is a gift. That's what we're wrestling through. So today we are exploring the sense of touch, which, is something that maybe we don't always think about in church. But what we're going to explore together is the places in the world that offer you consensual, non-sexual, affectionate touch are very few. In fact, this might be one of the few less than 5 spaces in your life where you might have something like that to experience. It turns out that we have become a world that is sort of out of touch with our own sense of touch, losing touch with touch. It's just a pastor joke for you there. Here's 2 examples from the internet that I love. This is a stand-up comedian who goes by Phil on the internet. One of his best jokes is he explains that only people of my ethnicity with lighter skin will say the word skedaddle. Only white people leave the room by skedaddling. In this series of jokes, he says, before he skedaddles, he wants to share one story, which is this embarrassing moment where when he was first falling in love with his wife, and she said, "Will you learn to touch me in a way that is loving but non-sexual?" And he thought about it for a minute, and he put his hand on her shoulder and said, "I'm proud of you, son." Because that was the only time in his life that he could come up with that fit those qualifications. The only time. We have in some ways lost touch with our capacity to physically interact in ways that are life-giving. Here's another example from this person on the internet who goes by Cool Calm Curly. She wrote this memory. This is incredible. "I remember starting the 8th grade days after my mom passed away. I sat in front of the class and just stared at the little laminated memorial card from her funeral on my binder. The teacher noticed and asked me if I wanted to excuse myself. I went in the hallway and I cried. The teacher came out and asked me if I'd like a buddy to go with me to the bathroom. Kudos for great teachers. I didn't pick my best friend or anyone that I actually even talked to. I said Emily, a super quiet Chinese girl that barely spoke English. I thought she would decline, but I heard the teacher call her name, and she walked out into the hallway immediately, no hesitation. And we went into the bathroom, and she just sat with me. She didn't ask me what was wrong. Clearly, everyone already knew. And she just put her hand on my shoulder and passed me tissues until I was ready to go back to class. I hope she's doing all right. 20 years later, I'm still thankful for the way that she just sat with me with something so devastating. Thanks again, Emily. There is something so powerfully nonverbal about the right kind of touch at the right moment. People in church tend to be words people. We read a text, we study words, and then we say words about the words. But there is something profound that your body is capable of doing that words could never do. That we have lost the capacity sometimes to affect on one another. And that's why we read these stories and we're like, wow, how did that kid learn that? I would not have known to do that in the 8th grade. We've lost the capacity to do what our bodies were designed to do. To make physical contact with one another in memorable and maybe even spiritually formative ways. So we're wrestling through that. So we must recover a deeper spiritual sense of our bodies. Here's why. This is recap a little bit. One of the things that we have worked through in this series is the nature of carrying trauma in a physical way. The study of epigenetics suggests that when something bad happens in your family history, it is coded into your own genetic code. You carry that forward through time. Profoundly, that also means that as you do the work to heal, that too could be passed along. That's a really remarkable facet of epigenetics. But the reality is that trauma is physical. You carry it in your physical body, and so we're working with the implication that if the trauma lives in your body, then the healing must also be in your body. That if you do the spiritual work of becoming whole in Jesus' name, somehow epigenetics just, that has a DNA impact on your body and your life, and possibly, quite possibly, your progeny. So if the trauma's in our bodies, the healing has to be in our bodies too. One of the things we've also discussed at length is how when we're feeling those big, dark feelings, understanding why we are triggered is one thing. It's important, but it is incomplete. The real path towards healing is to feel those things in our body. And so we've been working through, I've been quoting this every time, this bit from Ezra Klein and Pema Chodron. Some people have reached out and been like, oh, I've read all her books, I love her. And I'm like, well, it's just a podcast. That's all I know of it. Here it is. She's an 89-year-old Buddhist monk, and she's with her own body in a way that is insightful for us and I think spiritually instructive to us as followers of Jesus. Here's a bit of their conversation. You don't always have to have the right name for it, but when you're feeling a sensation, you ask, what am I feeling? What does this feel like right now? Not conceptually, you don't have to say mad or a feeling word or anything like that. But when I ask, what are you feeling? You need to find that feeling in your body. And what you find often is a contraction, she says, some kind of tightness, a knot almost. And you can ask the person, well, where is that feeling? Name a body part. And some people will say, well, I feel this pain all over my body. But usually they'll say it's in my solar plexus or my throat or my jaw or my stomach. Wherever it is, it doesn't matter. But once you're there, the attitude towards it has to be something like this. It is not something to be eradicated. It's not to say, let's find that feeling in our body and then throw it out. The attitude is more that you send it. I like to use the word tenderness. You find that feeling of that negative emotion in your body, wherever it is located, and you send warmth towards it. People do this differently and find their own way to do it. And if you want to conceptualize it, I would say that you send it unconditional love. You send it unconditional warmth and unconditional tenderness, like you're not going to give up on yourself. That's how you interact with that physical feeling of that negative emotion. Ezra Klein then asks, what if you don't feel unconditional love towards that feeling? Pema Chodron, if you don't feel unconditional love towards it, that's not a problem. Then you send warmth towards the feeling of not having unconditional love. So what does that feel like? What would you say that it feels like to not have unconditional love towards yourself? To not have unconditional love, Ezra Klein says. Yes, to feel like you don't qualify for it because you can't send unconditional love towards yourself. How does that feel? Ezra Klein. Let me try to think through how it feels for me. Long silence in the podcast. Ezra Klein says, I think the idea of how it would feel to have unconditional love for a feeling like that is so alien that even trying to describe it is hard. The water I swim in is wanting certain feelings to go away. And as a follower of Jesus, it is easy for me to connect the dots to say, oh, the part of myself that I wish was not there, the feeling that I wish that would go away, it is actually easy for me to imagine my shepherd Jesus having an unconditional love towards that part of me. Even that part of myself that I wish was not there, Jesus gives me the resource to say, oh, he loves that even before I ever could. That I'm living in complete denial of something that I carry with me in my bones, but Jesus knows that it is there. And he is already drawing me into a tender, loving relationship with it. And that is because a close reading of the Bible shows that the human body is a gift. Incredible verse about this. The Word became human flesh and made his dwelling among us. African-American theologian Brian Bantam says this, the incarnation is a testament to the truth that our bodies matter. It is not just a random act that your body is what it is. It was designed that way to contain in specific and unique ways the presence of Jesus. Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr. Roar. I don't know what it was. Everybody saw it working before, right? It was working a second ago. In Jesus' birth, God was saying that it was good to be human. It is good to be human. So we're going to explore a key facet of being human being, our sense of touch. Yes, God and your sense of touch. Okay, we're going to look at three lenses here: science, Bible, and church. Your sense of touch from three perspectives: the perspective of science, the perspective of Scripture, and the perspective of what you might call ecclesiology, our sense of churchliness, our community approach to touch. Okay, science. This article is called A Systematic Review and Multivariate Meta-Analysis of the Physical and Mental Health Benefits of Touch Interventions. Don't you love science? I feel like, yeah, we're doing some science now with that. This is a meta-analysis of 154 studies where they kind of like put them into a blender and do mathematical analysis on this grand scope of all this data across 154 studies. And what they conclude is physical interaction is incredible for your mental health and human flourishing. Famously, human infants cannot survive unless they have enough physical touch. Each of us would not have survived our childhoods without the right amount of human interaction. But the same is true in a different way for adults, that we cannot arrive at like non-depressed, non-anxious human thriving without the right amount of physical touch. Some of the studies in here, like 20 or 30 of them, are on if mechanical touch counts for the human sensory experience. Does that deliver the same mental health benefits if it's not even a person, but like a robot type of thing hugging you? And the studies that are done on children, which is true and weird, it is not clear that that helps them at all. But for adults, it still helps you if you are hugging a plush robot, because your body was designed to be touched and hugged and cared for in that way. It is a specific way that you were designed, that you cannot thrive without that sort of physical interaction. And so this is a study on the kind of consensual, non-sexual touch that is really not available to us very many spaces. But 154 studies suggest that you also cannot thrive without it. Interestingly, when you pay attention from this lens of the human physical sense of touch, touch shows up everywhere in the stories of Jesus. I will give you but 3 very quick passages. Mark chapter 5. A large crowd followed Jesus and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but instead grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in a crowd to touch his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." And immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see the one who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Scholars who wrestle with this bit about Jesus not knowing who it was suggest that this passage is in a way about the sense that the body knows something that the mind cannot. The body knows something first in both of these people. She says, for her experience, she felt it in her body that she was healed. There is a bodily way of knowing that our brains are only catching up with. Similarly, Jesus knew, immediately aware in his body of what had happened. There is something that your body knows that your brain simply is coming appraised of and is along for the ride. Your body is made for this kind of knowing. Matthew chapter 8. When Jesus had come down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and there was a leper who came to him and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." And he stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I do choose. Be made clean." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And then Jesus said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priests and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." This is a fascinating passage because Jesus is coming down from the mountain having just delivered the Sermon on the Mount. And scholars suggest to us that the author of the book of Matthew has put this passage here as a way of saying, if you were to learn and embody everything that is in the Sermon on the Mount, this is what it would look like. A deep physical interaction, a deeply inclusive physical interaction. Now, this idea of leprosy that is a technical diagnosis that we might use today, but in the Bible times, that could have meant any contagious skin disease. No one knew what it was, but the plan was keep that person far outside the community so no one else could get it. This person had been excluded for years or possibly decades, maybe their whole life. So the fact that Jesus would touch this person is a violation of all kinds of protocol and religious ruling and safety. That across all kinds of taboos, Jesus has included this person. And what's amazing is Jesus could have said, "Okay, go tell everyone." But instead, he ropes someone else in. For the priest to deliver this examination, the priest must also touch this guy. Jesus is inviting other people into this kind of physical contact. It becomes a communal thing. And what we start to get a sense for is that there maybe is no message of Jesus that is not embodied and communal. That's why this goes right after the teaching. That if you want to do the teachings of Jesus, it has to be in a physically interactive and inclusive way. That's an incredible thing to be right here after the Sermon on the Mount. This last passage, I'll give you two versions. Jesus has been resurrected and is meeting with his followers for the first time. And Thomas famously has said, unless I get to touch this dude, I will never believe it. I will never believe it. And here it is, starting in the middle, verse 26. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. And though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And then he said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. In Luke's version, there's one of these great Greek words that goes on your flashcard, and you try to learn how to pronounce it. I won't torture you with that. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said, peace be with you. And they were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. And he said to them, why are you troubled? Why do doubts raise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you have. This word here for touch is different than the other Greek words. This one is more like jostle, feel, corral, carry, throw up on your shoulder, grab a hold of me, interact physically with me. Jesus is inviting them to this deep, embodied interaction. There is no way to read through the stories of Jesus and not see clearly that he is valuing his body and the bodies of others. And as I've thought about this series, part of why I feel like this was what we discerned as a community was important to address now is that it is clear to us that we live in a world where some bodies are valued more than others. So to see Jesus be so deeply valuing of his body and of others is such a powerful corrective. It invites us to something very strange and very wonderful, which is to interact in these sorts of ways. So, thinking about it in terms of a church. This week, I was doing two things. I was arguing with some people online about their exclusive reading of Scripture. And then I was thinking about an entire denomination that has begun banning churches that have women pastors. And I was thinking about the few passages that if you squint, maybe can be applicable there. And then I was thinking about these passages here. Paul wrote all over the place, salute one another with a holy kiss. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Greet all the brethren with a holy kiss. Greet one another with the kiss of love. And I couldn't help but think, those guys I was arguing with on the internet, we don't have to listen to them at all until they start smooching each other. That's when we will know that they have a consistent hermeneutic and that they have taken the Bible seriously. And until then, we can go about our merry way with our lives. But I was also thinking this. I will not make you do this. But now, to close our service, we are going to embody the invitation to interact in consensual, non-sexual ways with one another that promote human flourishing. So I want to invite you just for a moment to put this into action, and we're going to have what is sometimes described to me as the introvert's nightmare of standing together and shaking someone's hand and meeting someone that you've never met before, and should you dare, should you be brave enough to give them a hug of one form or another. Is everyone ready? You don't have to say yes. We're doing it anyways. All right, here we go. Meet and greet. 3, 2, 1, go.